The school board meeting for Tuesday, June 20th, 2023 for the Des Moines Public Schools to order. Ms. Rios, would you please take the roll?
Yes. Ms. Alonso Diaz?
Here.
Ms. Bradley? Ms. Caldwell Johnson? Ms. Knox?
Here.
Ms. Martirano?
Here.
Ms. Norris?
Here.
Ms. Sawyer?
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. The first item of business is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion and a second to approve the agenda?
Norris motion to approve.
Alonso second.
Board members, please cast your votes. Motion is approved 5-0. Next on the agenda is the public forum, followed by the consent and regular agenda. We provide speakers at the forum an opportunity to address the board for up to 3 minutes regarding items that are not on the board agenda. We also allow any person the opportunity to speak to the board for up to 5 minutes following the presentation of an agenda item. If anyone wishes to speak during any portion of the business meeting, please email rosa.rios@dmschools.org. The same speaking protocols apply to all individuals who wish to address the board. Speakers will be called individually, and we ask that you state your name and address prior to providing comments. Students and minors do not have to provide their addresses. Guests of the board are encouraged to speak to matters relating to programs, services, and operations of DMPS. Please remember that Iowa law prohibits us from discussing specific employees or their job performance. We ask all speakers to avoid references to personalities or character attacks, as those types of comments do not contribute to the purpose for which this public forum exists. The use of inappropriate language will not be tolerated, and individuals choosing to do so will be gavelled out of order and asked to excuse themselves from the premises or be escorted out by district security. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in a discussion with the public forum speakers, as it is our obligation to discuss only matters posted in the public agenda for the sake of transparency and opportunity afforded to all community stakeholders. Matters requiring attention will receive appropriate staff and/or board follow-up at the time after the meeting. Thank you for your participation. We appreciate your feedback and input. Ms. Rios, do we have any speakers for the public forum?
We do not have any speakers today.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda, Interim Superintendent Smith, would you please present district recognitions?
There are no recognitions today.
Thank you. The next item on our agenda is D1, Monitoring Report, Goal 1. I will go ahead and facilitate the monitoring report and have more to read to you. Progress monitoring is an opportunity for the board to ask questions to help us understand whether there's an alignment between the community's vision, our goals, and the reality, current student performance and growth. To understand whether progress is being made, we will ask, does reality match the vision? Is there growth toward the vision? Is there a strategy and plan sufficient to cause growth toward the vision? It is important to emphasize that as the board, our role is to set the direction in which the superintendent is expected to lead the district via the goals and to constantly monitor the superintendent's progress towards achieving them. This means it's the superintendent's role to identify and implement strategies that will result in progress towards each goal, so that as long as they honor the values of the community as described by our guardrail policies. You will hear board members asking questions to understand what is working and where there are gaps. All right, so to help everyone follow along as we ask questions, please indicate the page number and the progress measure or the data measure that you're referring to. Today, we will start with Goal 1. The percent of all fourth grade students proficient on the ISASP ELA assessment will increase from 52.7% in June 2022 to 67% in June 2026, and then we will proceed to Goal 2. My board colleagues, I invite you to begin your monitoring questions on Goal 1.
This is all of it, right? Not just one
This is Goal 1.
and 1A and 1B.
The interim measures for Goal 1, correct, yes.
So, Matt, on page 1, in terms of the percentage of second and third graders meeting benchmark, The data is showing that we did not achieve the target we had hoped. Who's struggling the most?
Yeah, so in all of our data sets, and it's probably a good idea to go ahead and preview that some of what we discuss, actually a lot of what we discuss is going to be similar in the Goal 2 report as well, just given the nature of the two different reports. But the answer to your question is students with IEPs specifically. Our system of supports for students with IEPs is not manifesting results for those students at an accelerated rate.
Matt, I know I sent a question in advance, so I am talking about Goal 1. I am looking at page 3 in regards to next steps, and you discussed a results-focused performance review. And I'm still, can you provide information on how that results-focused performance review for teachers will accelerate the learning of these students?
Yeah.
Jackie, can I ask you to wait until the how portion and the future focus questions for that one?
Okay?
Thank you. So we'll just note how will this play out for teachers moving forward?
I've got it noted.
Just parking lot, that one, thank you.
Can I just ask then, what is the current practice that we are using to provide feedback to teachers? I'll ask that first.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah. The current practice right now is just through coaching and support. So we've got instructional coaches embedded at every school. And that coaching and support is provided in addition by administrators, by school administrators, the principal and the associate principal. And so teachers are given feedback on their instructional practices. The frequency and the cadence of that feedback or the granularity of that feedback is going to vary. There's some variance in that from school to school, and that's an opportunity for us to continue to calibrate and remove that variance of that feedback.
So is it peer-to-peer or?
In some cases, there's peer-to-peer. The predominant methodology is from the instructional coach who is fully released to provide that feedback along with the school administration.
Thank you.
The peer-to-peer oftentimes will manifest itself in those PLCs. Yep.
For Goal 1 on page 2, under what's going well, second and third graders in ELL met the spring benchmark. What strategies are being implemented that are giving us those results?
Two specific strategies. One is that access strategy with our LEAP plan of making sure that our students who are multilingual learners are given access to that grade level standard-based core classroom instruction. Within that instruction, though, there's a number of language acquisition strategies that are utilized by the teachers. And so that was part of our professional learning this year, was to make sure that we had those language acquisition strategies being universally implemented. So we're seeing the results of that.
Do you think that those are the most significant, or maybe the most, is that what caused the most significant impact?
I think the most significant impact is first and foremost a result of access, of students being in those grade level standard-based classrooms, receiving that grade level instruction through that curriculum. I think that's the most significant impact that we're seeing.
So on page 3, under what is going well, it notes that all third grade, because we're monitoring fourth graders, fourth grade proficiency, but this says that all third grade student groups had 57.4% of students meeting spring benchmark. If we looked at fourth grade, that's above what our goal is. like, what's maybe going well there, and is there expectation we could, I don't know if that's a future question, so if it is, let me know and I can table it, but expectation we could see continued growth for those third graders into fourth grade?
So perhaps it would be, what strategy do you attribute this success to, and can it be?
Can it be maintained?
Maintained and mirrored in other grade levels?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah. There's no different strategy deployed in third grade right now than fourth grade or second grade or first grade, so to speak. And so some of our opportunities and our next steps are to dig in those grade level bands. So that particular goal data point that you're referencing is an Iowa assessment data point. It's the actual goal measure itself. And so what we have are on-demand reports right now. The full report is not completely released yet. And so as that full report gets released, we can dig into those very granular, specific grade level bands, along with disaggregated data within the grade level band to learn more about that information and what might be different or unique in those grade levels. But from a district standpoint and from a systemic implementation plan, there's nothing different. And so I just don't know the answer to your question yet. There's an answer, but I just don't know it yet.
Can you just provide some examples of lack of appropriate scaffolding
Sure.
for us when you're referring to that? Would be on page 2 around what's not going well. You say lack of appropriate scaffolding, taking the instruction and tasks off grade level, and limiting access as evidenced by Gleam inventory walk with 10 elementary schools. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so what we're seeing it happen, or it looks predominantly in two different ways. One is within our EL curriculum, there are interventions and scaffolds built into it. And one of the misappropriations or applications of those scaffolds is to provide this scaffold to all students. And so if we look to add, for example, sentence stems to a particular reading prompt and help students actually answer the prompt through these sentence stems, we're providing that many times across the entire classroom for all students, whether or not they actually need that scaffold to meet that learning target and that standard. That's one example of a misapplied scaffold. The other application of a scaffold is to provide too many scaffolds. And so we over-scaffold so that students, they lose the opportunity to productively struggle with the actual grade level or standard-based task that's in front of them. We see a lot, like an example would be like when comparing two characters' perceptions of what's happening in a literary novel, when we're trying to compare and contrast how two characters actually interact in the novel, we might actually take one character in a classroom and really pick that apart or what that character's doing, and then do the same thing with another character analysis, but not actually compare the two. And so we've scaffolded it to give more students success with great intentions, but we've lowered the rigor of the actual task itself. And so therefore, we've actually now gone below grade level. And it's difficult, it's tricky, because teachers are implementing the curriculum, and they're doing what we're asking and what we're teaching. What we got to do a better job at a systems level is teach more about the appropriate application of these scaffolds, when to use them, why to use them. And again, where this gets tricky and complex is it's not the same at every building. Where students are in their learning progressions are different in classrooms, are different in schools. And so that sort of agency around making those instructional decisions is really based at the classroom level. And so having great, strong PLCs and teachers and instructional coaches and administrators that are super knowledgeable about what a scaffold is, what its intended use is, and what you might get from that scaffold, and when to pull it back, when to add it. That is, that's the art of teaching, of knowing that information about your students and being able to apply that appropriately. That's teaching at its best. On a really, really good day, that's a really complex thing to be able to do, and that's why teaching is difficult, and that's why we need amazing teachers. And they're doing it. We just haven't done a good job at the central office level yet of teaching that. We've rolled out the curriculum. Now it's time to get into those scaffolds and the appropriate application of it and help our teachers to know when to use them, when to not use them, what you might be looking for, being data literate in terms of what you're seeing in terms of student learning progressions within the lesson. That's our job to help them to know that.
What would you say are the biggest barriers that you've, in reaching that we've?
Time mostly, and it's time in two different ways. Time in terms of being in front of teachers at the district level, so you bring in all third grade or all fourth grade teachers into this conversation around the appropriate utilization of scaffolds within the EL curriculum. We don't have a lot of time at the district level to be able to do that with our curriculum coordinators, to be able to teach that, who know this curriculum inside and out. And so we have limited time to be able to do that. So we're having to chunk that out and then also tier that out and teach that to instructional coaches, teach that to principals so that they can turn and about face and do that with their staff. So there's just sort of that cascade of time and training with folks. It's just taking longer than what any of us would like. The other aspect of time is when teachers are in those PLCs, when those PLCs are interrupted through staff absences and covering classes, that might only happen, let's say, for example, 10 times a year, but that's 10 40-minute sessions of learning around scaffolding and applications that they didn't get involved in, that they didn't have the opportunity to be engaged with their peers. So it does have a multiplier effect, but time is an area that we have to continue to wrap our head around how we're going to problem solve that. And a lot of times the answers are with teachers, like asking teachers, how might we actually use this time better from a district office level that would be a better support for you? How can we actually get in front of you? Summer learning, of course, there's some challenges with that right now as well. But
What responses have you received to date when you ask teachers about what they need to better do their
time, it's the
Time
response we're getting
for
time for learning,
professional development?
Yep, for learning and time to deliver the lesson and then come back and say, all right, what just happened? Like, how did that work for me? Just the reflection time. We provide that a lot within our coaching cycles. So our instructional coaches, that's 99% of their job is to bring teachers through those learning cycles to reflect on their instructional practices, their decision making, look at the outcomes and the outputs of those instructional decisions, and just having more time to do that in a space where you can process what just happened and go back and apply something different the next day.
Thanks.
Can I go?
Page 3, I think it's page 3, goal 1, under what we are going to do or the next steps. You mentioned the design and the implementation of a coherent system of instruction or instructional accountability. And I know that it seems like time is maybe the biggest issue. This designing and implementing this system, is this like a one-time event, or is this something that will be done regularly during a semester or the whole year? What does that look like for teachers?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question because my answer is in sort of two parts. The first aspect of that is our current system of instructional accountability is mostly through that coaching model that we just talked about. And it's a good model. We've got some tweaks that we need to make to it. We got more things that we need to do with our current instructional model. What's missing from that particular model are the quantifiable metrics that go with that accountability system. And so An example of that at the central office level is based on the goals that are established in this year's, newly sort of generated interim goals. The executive cabinet team has a performance and accountability system that has quantifiable metrics associated with that. That sort of model does not cascade through our system yet. And so there's opportunity for us to balance the support with a focus and a press on quantifiable outcomes. Our current system does not do that. And there's complexity with that. There's greatness, and what I mean by that is so this particular goal measure is about the Iowa assessments. There's interim goals that have to do with FAST. Both with the Iowa assessment and with our FAST, if we look at currently student accountability, there's no student accountability associated with these metrics in the idea of what someone might think of as a high-stakes testing environment. Coming from Texas, and that's a high-stakes testing environment, which I'm not advocating for by any stretch of the imagination, so we're all on the same page. But that is an environment where if you don't pass, you don't graduate. And so you see a different sort of mindset and approach to assessment. I'm not advocating for that. There's lots of negatives and disadvantages that go with that system. However, the pendulum of a system of support without any sort of quantifiable metric press is also not yielding results too. And so these student outcomes as it relates to our assessments are representative of right now what students know and are able to do based on these standards. And so we have to find a mindset and a structure as an organization that balances the two, the support with the press of having metrics associated with your accountability for what you're doing, both at the building and the central office level. And we did that this year with the executive cabinet team, and there needs to be a cascade of influence and with that same model across our organization.
That was a more future-focused question. Are we ready to move to future?
No, I have one more
focused?
question.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, June 2022, 52.7% of our fourth graders were proficient. This is on page 1, the preliminary results for goal 1. But here we said a year later, and we're down to 50.1% of our fourth grade students that are proficient. So in looking at what's not going well, because it's the same curriculum, right? Now where teachers have had a year with it, is your primary, are you primarily attributing us not seeing growth due to too much scaffolding over this year? Or are there any other factors that you would say we need to be aware of and considering in that wrong movement, I
Sure.
guess?
What would
So-
you attribute this 2% loss to?
Beyond the science of reading, right? The science of teaching around implementing the curriculum at standards-based levels and applying appropriate scaffoldings at the right times. Beyond that, there are a couple of variables that I would lift up. My challenge in lifting them up, I'm going to lift them up anyway, but my challenge in lifting them up is I don't have any quantifiable metric to support it. And what I'm going to lift up, and I'll give you some data points to maybe support my theory, my wondering, because it's more of a wondering right now, is in January, we had a cyber incident in the beginning of a legislative session that absolutely took a toll on public educators, and Des Moines is no different. And so I'm wondering about those variables and what it did to our staff. And the reason why I say that is a year ago this time, we actually were meeting this goal. In the winter, we were on track and meeting this goal. And then in the spring, all of a sudden, we've gone backwards a little bit. Beyond the science of reading and the science of teaching that we're working to see a dip, I don't know of another answer right now that I have evidence to support. I've got thoughts and wondering, the team and I, we've talked about this quite a bit. I wonder right now. I don't, we're digging into it around what would be those variables that may have been attributed to going backwards. When our previous 2 data points, we were not going backwards. We were actually on a very positive trend line. And so that's frustrating. To not only have it happen, it's frustrating to not know a definitive answer to that. One of the questions is, because I'll preview a little bit for you, in July, we're going to talk about goal 3, and we're meeting that goal. And so all the preliminary data says we're going to meet that goal in those interims. So apply that same theory to that at the high school level, and it doesn't exactly work out. And so then we begin to ask questions and wonderings around our student sort of responses in Panorama at the elementary level around connection and sense of belonging is significantly higher. And my basic theory of wondering is our elementary staff, with their connections to students being that much higher, are we carrying our struggles into the classroom, and students are feeling it? Are they feeling I don't know. I lift that up not because I'm suggesting one thing or another. I'm lifting up is I'm curious about it, and so is my team, around if we've had these trajectory over the last year, going from last spring to the winter of going and meeting all of our goals, and then having 2 major things happen to us as an organization. I just don't have an evidence-based understanding yet of the impact on that yet, but we're looking.
What would you attribute on page 3? You mentioned that 3rd grade EL students that are English learners in 3rd grade are outperforming the state and the AEA. What are your thoughts, and what do you believe you can attribute that to?
Yeah, I think that is still definitely attributable to our change in our LEAP plan, and making sure that our students who are multilingual learners have that grade level standard-based access to that core content. And we're deepening and we're growing in our capacity to provide language acquisition strategies across the board for those students. And so we're seeing the growth in that. And just to sort of highlight that, that's definitely, we're seeing that in EL, our students in our ELL program sort of across the board, in terms of outperforming the state and the Heartland Area Education Agency. But 2nd grade, for example, our 2nd grade students who identify as Black males and are also multilingual learners, Des Moines Public Schools, those students had a 48% proficiency rate, as compared to the state of Iowa, 42%, and so 6% higher than the state. And you'll see trends like that sort of across the board for our students who are multilingual learners. I think our plan is working. There's more that can be done, but it's working. We've actually gotten a call from the state asking what we're doing differently.
Thank you. Board colleagues, would you like to transition to future focus questions? If so, I'll turn it over to Jackie.
I think Maria asked the question.
Okay.
I actually was going to ask, sorry. I was actually,
Can you hear me now?
yeah.
Okay. I was actually going to ask you, we're going to move into the future questions. And so going back to this trend of surpassing the state and AEA, what is the plan? How will you keep that trend going?
The first answer to that is to stay the course. So while there's evidence in terms of the data points that we've already lifted up that plan is working, there's also areas that plan can still be improved. And so working with our teachers in our ELL program and asking their opinion about what else, how might we enhance our, whether it's language acquisition strategies or enhance the actual programmatic experience for students and for families. So that's the real step right now, is to ask what, from their level, from their perspective, from their classroom experience with students, what did they see that we could do more of specifically, but also continuing to work with teachers in a co-teach model of making sure that those universal professional learning opportunities for teachers to know and understand those language acquisition skills because those benefit all students. That's not just a benefit for students who are English language learners. Those language acquisition skills, that vocabulary, word print rich environment is good for actually all students. And so we're continuing to make sure that we provide universal learning opportunities for all teachers that match that same sort of professional learning that we provided to our teachers in our ELL program.
You mentioned that time is one of the largest barriers. What are you planning, or how are you planning to address that barrier moving forward?
Ask a lot of questions of staff, of teachers, about how we might utilize our professional learning scheduled days, our full days, more efficiently. That'll be more impactful. That's the first. The second is to also continue to get and glean from some different perspectives outside of our current reality. I mean, Dr. Roberts is going to bring a wealth of knowledge around that, and so we're excited to have Dr. Roberts look and analyze our professional learning plan and give some feedback to us about what we might be able to do differently moving forward to maximize and optimize the time that we actually do have. The other sort of time aspect of it is the team is continuing to work towards ensuring the health and well-being of our staff so they're not pulled from PLCs. And so staff absenteeism, while it's much better than it was during the pandemic, that should be the only time I use that word during this meeting, but it's much better. But when staff are not there, that hurts. And so we saw some staff absences this year. That's definitely going to have an impact on children because they're the best ones to provide that learning for those kids. And sometimes we're out for good reasons. But having a plan in place that supports student learning while their primary teacher is out for whatever on extended leave, we got to continue to have to do a better job about that. So there's more work to be done there in terms of making sure that we optimize that time that's missed. And just doing an intervention after school actually doesn't replace core instruction.
So you shared that the students that were struggling the most were students with IEPs, correct?
That's correct.
And I know we've talked at this table, though, I think it was the last meeting or the meeting before, about our desire to lower our identified students that have IEPs.
That's correct.
Do you see that as going hand in hand, knowing that these are the ones that are struggling the most? I mean, do you still feel like that's an effective strategy, or chuck me through that because that sounds
Sure.
a little spinning in my head.
No, yes, and I'm going to throw a number out. I'm going to look at Shelley when I throw this number out, and you give me the head nod if I'm even remotely close to this. But we've actually staffed students for IEPs about 200 students fewer this year than we have in years past, and what we are missing still in what we're implementing, what we started training on in December, is a research-based intervention program through 95% Group and Wilson intervention that allows us to support students with IEPs and specially designed instruction. So our specially designed instruction that happens at the building level, in the classroom level, when students are not in core instruction, we've been doing the best we can as a staff across the district, but it's not been a universal curriculum that's been applied to students. With really good intentions, we've pulled the best lessons we can off of social media sites and other areas, Teachers Pay Teachers, which has some really good lessons and things like that, but it's not necessarily research-based, it's not standards-based, and it's typically not grade level-based. And so that's why we went out and we found the 95% Group and Wilson to make sure that our specially designed instruction for students with IEPs is getting to that grade level standards-based curriculum access when they're receiving that specially designed instruction by law.
And you said that happens that's happening more and more in the classroom?
Well, it hasn't been happening in the classroom, and so now that's why we've got out to get this curriculum to help support that. So now we've got to do some training, and we had schools pilot it actually this spring, and they got some really good results. They're not the results that we want yet, but they're better results than their peers got who were not utilizing it, right? So if you utilize that as the variable, it showed some promising results for things that we can actually adapt and we can actually move on.
Matt, I know that when you were talking about scaffolding, and one of the things you had mentioned is that it's not the same across the buildings, across the district. Is there a plan to figure out how do we make that the same? I mean, or is there need for variance, and what might be the plan be?
Yeah, there is the need for variance. But the universal sort of education around what a scaffold is and when it might be appropriate and how we apply it appropriately, that sort of universal education has to take place. We have to provide training on that. Where the variance comes into play is, again, just depending on the students that you serve and the topic that you're teaching and what scaffold might be the most appropriate scaffold for that particular lesson or that particular unit. And when to apply it and for which students. Now you're starting to get into the granularity of the day of student by student, student-centered learning environments. And there's going to be some variance in that. But in order to actually get to that level of variance, you have to have a foundational understanding of what scaffolds are and how we use them and actually why they're in the curriculum the way they are, why they're embedded in the curriculum. So it's not enough just for staff to deliver the curriculum. They have to know why the curriculum is written the way it is so that they can actually teach it the way it's intended to be taught. That's when you start getting students into that aggressive growth on those assessments, whether it's FAST or whether it might be IO assessments.
So knowing that there is a need to educate in more of that professional development with teachers, what is the plan to get them there? Is there a plan?
The team is building a plan with teachers. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, that's again knowing that we've got a lot that we want to deliver to teachers, but we have to chunk that and we have to actually optimize that time with them. And so we have to tier out what are we going to teach, when are we going to teach it, and to whom, so that those individuals can about face and actually support teachers. So bringing in all third grade teachers once a week, we don't have that time built in. But what we do have time built in is time potentially with instructional coaches, administrators. And so how can we teach them at an accelerated rate so that they can about face and provide that in-the-moment learning for their staffs, whether that's through a PLC, whether that's through a weekly or a monthly professional development with their own teams. We have to be able to leverage our system to support, the 1,500 to 1,700 teachers that we have.
Earlier, when you were talking about, when I was asking about lack of appropriate scaffolding and what that looked like, you talked about sort of seeing the teacher, or you used the example of giving, not comparing appropriately or something was, and you'd mentioned that really we just need to increase the rigor in the classroom. You said having higher, I'm putting words in your mouth for expectations, but essentially that was sort of increasing the expectation level and rigor. How does that happen? How does that happen for our teachers to be able to effectively increase the expectations and rigor?
I think the first is an awareness of what the actual standard is. What is the standard that we're teaching? What is the task? And is the task actually on grade level? Number one, if they're teaching that EL curriculum, it's on grade level. That's why we got it. It's been vetted. That's why it's there. Knowing that first. And then the second part of that is if you're going to ask students to do something, and then it's a mindset. If you believe that students are not going to be able to get, because the curriculum is difficult. Being at grade level is not actually easy. It's difficult curriculum. And then it's a mindset, is can we get students there? And if I feel like they can't get there, and I apply with good intentions various scaffolds to help them get to that, but I take away the opportunity for them to actually struggle with their learning, we've just lowered the rigor of the actual standard. It looks like, for all intents and purposes, that I'm teaching the curriculum, and I am, but not the way it was intended. And And so if we apply one of those particular scaffolds for all students, but only 3 students actually needed that scaffold, then we just lowered the level of rigor for 25 kids when it was unnecessarily done, if that makes sense.
So the way is just conversations with teachers?
Education,
or-
professional learning, about recognizing, and for us too, at the central office level, recognizing that when you're a teacher and you've got 25, 30 kids in front of you, sometimes if I have a lack of time of planning, then I'm going to provide that scaffold for everybody. And coming back saying it's okay if you don't, right? And here's why, right? Kids learning to productively struggle in classrooms is actually a good thing. But that's the art of teaching. That's that balance of toggling between how much am I going to support a student to actually ramp up that level of rigor in the classroom, and where am I going to go in and quote unquote save students within the moment. Like that takes investment, that takes learning, that takes school leaders and instructional coaches being cognizant also of those scaffolds and when they're appropriately applied and when not, and then having feedback and dialogue with teachers in the moment around, hey, have you thought about, like, before you actually give that scaffold, tell me why you're actually going to give that scaffold. What did you see? What did you learn? What did you know about before you applied it? And how can we actually go back and actually ramp up that level of rigor in the classroom? The only way you can do that is if you're in classrooms as instructional coaches and as administrators, providing that feedback with your teachers.
So I'm not a teacher, right? But just listening to that, that's a lot. I mean, that is a lot of expectation. You're essentially asking a teacher to individually teach, right? I mean, essentially have an individual education plan for all of their students every single day, right? And I'm just curious, aside from maybe some better usage of time during our professional development, are there other supports that should be considered or are being considered? Because in asking our teachers to give more, right? I mean, are there other considerations to help?
Yeah, I wouldn't
find
characterize it as
success.
give more. I would characterize it as give differently, right? Because what I just described is what teachers do now. And so, but it's not always done optimally. It's not always done with the greatest efficiency. It's not always done with the effectiveness. But that's also, I mean, that's the beautiful aspect of teaching, is that you try something, and if it works, great. You try to replicate it and do it again. If it doesn't, that's also great, because you just learned that it didn't work, and we can go back to that. And so creating that kind of culture and that kind of space is also incredibly needed in our buildings. And so some of the buildings where we see the most growth, the aggressive growth, are the ones that we have the best culture in. They have the culture of safety, of trying an instructional strategy and saying that just did not work out well at all. I'm going to reel that back in, and we say, what'd you learn? Not don't ever do that again, but what did you learn from it, and how can we help you to support that to do that differently? Like that's the art of leadership, right? The art of teaching, the art of leadership. These things go hand in hand in service to one another, to create an environment where folks are free to fail, if you will, because you learn from it. That's okay. Now we're going to do a little bit better next time.
So I love that you brought up leadership, because that's another important thing, right? Teachers and
100%.
the leadership for professional development.
100%, right? And so leaders set the culture of that building. They set the culture of safety, of instructional, and of safety, of how I'm going to feel if I try something new or if I don't try something new. 100%.
How are we going to see your next steps on page 3 show up or changes from the standpoint of budgeting is concerned?
All of our investments in professional learning, that's been accounted for. And so, again, these were things that we started looking at back in December as we were going through the budgeting process. So that's accounted for. The coherent system of instructional accountability, that's not a financial investment. It's a structural investment in terms of how we actually apply quantifiable metrics to outcomes. Are we holding folks accountable to outcomes in terms of learning? And so that's just that's a mindset shift and a pen to paper shift in terms of what we're monitoring.
Just one quick question. You were For goal one, under what we're going to do, we've been talking about the universal understanding of access and the plan that you're working on with your team. When do you hope this will be implemented? When do you think the plan will be ready to be implemented?
When, and what page are you referencing, Maria?
3? Is it page 3? Under goal 1, what we're going to do. So the system of instructional accountability.
That first bullet?
Yes.
I think that's more of a phased approach, and so the quantifiable metrics associated with administrators will be rolling out next year. It was with executive cabinet this year, that are directly tied and associated with these interim goals and these interim guardrails.
Thank you.
So you talked about kind of the impact of teacher morale or teacher morale from for external reasons, possibly being a factor into this, your wonderings. Can you tell me how you're going to quantify that, and also maybe how, can you share a little bit more about how you plan to quantify that?
Yeah, I don't have a plan
Or
yet.
investigate
Yeah.
that further?
I think investigating that further goes through conversations with staff. It's difficult right now with everybody out for the summer, and so we'll have to look at some fall. Of course, we have the Gallup, and we always have the opportunity to add or edit Gallup questions, which is just another example. You know, when we go back to the fall of this school year, we had the highest Gallup scores we've ever had, and so to see that come down in January just seems it deserves more questions, and it deserves further investigation. And so the likely scenario, we haven't finalized anything yet, would be to actually ask these questions via Gallup, because we can get to everybody at that point in time, and we've got a great response rate.
Matt, how can the board help?
I'm going to apply this answer to both monitoring reports, if you will. Legislatively, it feels like we really took it on the chin as an organization. And you guys do an amazing job of supporting us through helping us to stay the course, of asking great questions, of challenging us to do better, and be better leaders in executing our plan. Where we need, as an organization, continued sort of path clearing is legislatively. To have to pull administrators out of buildings to have conversations on how to actually execute on a bathroom bill, it took time, and it took quite a bit of planning, and everybody's doing it. That does not go without emotional tolls on folks as leaders, and so continuing to be an advocate for our kids, for our staff, for our families, regardless of how they identify, to make sure that they have safe spaces in our schools, that's important. And you guys are always involved, and you've reached across counties and districts. And so what I would offer up is that we still need more support. I feel like that's an area that I did not get a lot done in my role this year as interim superintendent, in terms of advocacy at the state capitol. That feels like a real opportunity that I could use some help on. I just didn't get anything done at the Capitol level, so I could use some help in that.
Any additional questions? All right. May I have a motion and a second to approve item D1?
Alonso second.
Any additional discussion? Board members, please cast your votes. The vote is approved, 5-0. Now we will transition into item D2, monitoring report goal 2. I will continue to facilitate unless anybody else wants to take the reins. I don't know about that. I'm working on it. All right. Goal 2, the percent of Black male fourth grade students proficient on the ISASP ELA assessment will increase from 29.5% in June 2022 to 67% in June 2026. We will begin with the past focus questions to gain understanding of how we got to where we are today, and then transition into future focus questions to understand what our next steps are moving forward. So, board members, I'm going to go ahead and number my pages.
Matt,
They're not on here.
so on page 1, 2A, can you just, I apologize, provide data clarity? What is the number of grade 4 Black males, roughly?
Roughly, I'm looking at, I don't think I have grade 4 right in front of me. You're talking about the end size, right? Mm-hmm. It's going to be small. Where's Josie? Thank you.
Okay.
We'll
So,
have it for you in just a second.
and 34%, I just want to make sure I'm reading this accurately, 34% of that number is who we're talking about, the actual population that is either, that we're looking at. I just want to make sure I understand the population that we're
That's
measuring.
correct.
Okay.
For that goal measure.
Yeah.
You're correct.
So we've talked a lot about students. Sorry, we talked a lot about teachers and
Correct.
some of the reasons that teachers are having difficulty in accomplishing some of these goals. What are student-centered reasons? So maybe answer this from the perspective of a student. Why is it not working for Black males?
Yeah, in fourth grade, you're talking about for that particular goal measure. I don't have an answer to that. I can get an answer for that. I'll have to come back to you. We haven't asked specifically our Black male students in fourth grade what is or is not working for them specifically based on this data this year. And so that would be something that we would, that we're planning for in the fall as their, students are transitioning both from third to fourth, but our fourth graders that are transitioning to fifth grade as cohorts, we are making a plan to ask that very question.
Great, thank you.
What strategy was most effective for our Black males on page 3 under what's going well?
It's still going to be our access of making sure that students are receiving access to that standard-based grade level core instruction. At a systems level, that's going to be a common theme and a common answer. Just because when you're looking at the number of fourth grade classrooms across the district, that's going to be what's universal is a high quality curriculum that's implemented across every classroom.
What, if any, correlation to the new curriculum, which is now in its second year
Yeah, depending on
of
the grade level, yes.
implementation, which I believe one of the reasons it was selected was because of the cultural relevance.
Correct.
What, if any, correlation are you seeing to implementation of that curriculum and the small gains?
Well, in terms of previous, the reason why we selected it was, to your point, there's a cultural relevance or cultural proficiency and a social justice theme that's embedded in this curriculum. It's also one of the comes with one of the highest ratings from where's Kelly? I forgot the name of that national department. Ed Reports. Sorry, thank you, from Ed Reports. Given its relevancy to students, particularly students of color, as well as its high standard of rigor. So I think your specific question is how does that actually attribute to our black males in fourth grade? Like, what do they think of it? And what we've heard from students anecdotally through conversations in classrooms is that it's difficult and it's got some good topics, but not every topic is always fun to learn about, right? So learning about, birds, regardless of a student's experiences, sometimes it's not all the most intriguing, but we get deep into birds, and there's some opportunities there for us.
Thanks.
So maybe I'm not just reading it correctly, and help me if I'm not, but so while not achieving our target on goal 2, we did make gains over 2022. However, we didn't meet target or make gains in interim goal 2A or 2B. What do you attribute that to? Is this the conversation we had, maybe it was the last board meeting where you said those are not the right interims, or is it just, help me understand how you rationalize that?
Yeah, no, you're reading it correctly. We made growth with our students who identify as black male in fourth grade. So we just didn't make the accelerated growth on Iowa assessments to close the gap. Right. And so in terms of the interims, in terms of goal 2A and 2B, those student groups on those particular FAST measures went backwards. And that the team and I are still trying to figure that out. We're trying to understand why that would be. Again, going back to the conversation about goal 1 is this actually was not the case in winter. We were moving actually in the right direction in these goal metrics this winter. And so every indication that we had was that, all right, now we're on track. Now we're making the gains that we need to make, both typical and aggressive growth-wise, and then it fell off. And so this goes back to that similar conversation of trying to understand where, beyond the scaffolding and the science of teaching, what other variables are we not accounting for?
Can I ask, what grade takes ISASS? When does that start? Is that third?
Third grade.
Do you see any, and maybe I know this is not on here, but do you see third graders, do you see it not being correlated between what you saw in the FastBridge versus the Iowa assessment scores in that third grade bucket? No. So I'm just trying to figure out if these are not the right indicators.
No, I'm with you, sure, yeah. They are actually, so when we show that we didn't meet our interims and we didn't meet our goals. So right now, that is, at least at a service level, that says, well, if you don't meet your interims, you're probably not going to meet your goal. And that's actually what played out right here. So I think they are. I think where Dr. Roberts and the team will need to have some conversations is that sample size. Again, when you have a really small sample size, the smallest changes in that can fluctuate the data and the percentages really, really dramatically. And so we need to continue to look at our sample sizes and where we're actually assessing. The other aspect of this that we also need to talk about too, as a management team and an organization, is sometimes, and it's actually happening right now in this particular conversation, is we have metrics that are associated with two different goals, but they're also on both both goal reports, and so that's something for the team and I to go back and rethink about and get Dr. Roberts' opinion on that, around how we actually might make that clearer for you, but also for us as an organization, around how we actually organize our data sets, and are we getting the right answers of our systems work across the organization, or are we too focused in a few different areas? There's things that we just need to consider as an organization. again, these are conversations that we'll have with Dr. Roberts and certainly ask him to give us his thoughts on that.
Are any of the DMPS existing partners, community-based organizations, currently playing a role in supporting, enhancing, helping to accomplish this goal for Black males?
Are any?
And then if not, I'll save the other question for the future.
Sure.
Which is, what role could formally registered DMPS, community-based organizations play? So you can decide to answer it later if you want.
Yeah, some do play a role, but it's not necessarily been a role that we've been overtly directive about. It's not specific or unique to supporting Black male achievement. It might serve all students, right? There are some for sure. The future sort of orientation of that question is, I have an answer to that, but we can talk to that when we get through it. Preview is the answer is yes, there's opportunity there, but we can do a better job of that.
On page 3, what is going well? That last bullet point talks about Black males. In third grade, I have a higher percentage of typical or aggressive growth in comparison to the second and first grade students. Is there anything to note about that? Any learning to come from that?
Right now, the hypothesis is that's one more year in this access into grade level standard-based curriculum, right? And so that's the working hypothesis, but there's more questions to be asked of students, specifically of teachers in that regard. So we have working theories.
Can you have Kelly take your question back, because that was my question?
Yeah.
Do you have another one?
Yes. Page 3, under what's going well for Black males in ELL programming, they had higher typical or aggressive growth compared to all the students. What marks the difference? What do you attribute it to?
Well, there's nothing unique in terms of what we're offering programmatically in terms of language acquisition, implementation, or just access, to core curriculum in that standards-based teaching and learning. And it's not a huge difference in terms of percentages, but it is higher, and we're seeing that trend, that tick up for all students that are multilingual learners, but that tick seems to be a little bit more aggressive of that trend line going up for our Black males who identify as English language learners. And the caveat to that is sample size again, right? So when now we're talking about small numbers in comparison to the entire district, of 30,000 students. And so that percentage can fluctuate fairly dramatically, but the overall trend of that is consistent in the idea that our students who are multilingual learners are seeing accelerated growth from that change in that model and that programming for access. Who's also benefiting from that are Black males who are also multilingual learners.
And that's that LEAP plan?
That's correct.
All right, future focus questions? You want to go back to the community partners, Jackie?
Yeah, I just think we've talked a lot about community-based organizations and maybe the role they can play, especially with targeted demographics. And yet I also recall that if they're teaching things like literacy, they have to be taught the right way, or else it's counterproductive. So because DMPS has formal partners in a system that are providing out-of-school time programming in schools, what role could they play, and could they be an ally, or maybe not, because of the pedagogy behind the
Sure.
teaching?
Yeah, I think there is a space and there is a need for community partners to help support us in this endeavor. And one of the first opportunities is to ask in terms of, here's our need. What can you offer our young students who identify as Black male? What can you do to help us to serve these children and these students and these families better, because a lot of our systems are failing to do so. And so the first question is to ask and then get that response from our community partners, and then build that code-generated plan of what's going to happen, what's the accountability of that in terms of like, what are the outcomes that we want to see, right? And this goes back to that accountability structure of making sure that we've got some quantifiable metrics that we're looking at and holding ourselves to as an organization ubiquitously across our system.
Thanks.
Can you tell me what the child study teams are and how they will be playing a role, or how they're planned to be utilized?
Yeah, our child study teams are made up of staff members that support students who are being staffed for an IEP. And so similar to kind of what we've talked about, maybe it might have been the last conversation around looking to staff fewer students with an IEP unless the data is absolutely showing that standard deviation discrepancy that warrants it. But that child study team is important because we know that our data says that our students with IEPs who identify as Black male, our system of support's not serving those students well. And so providing both training and monitoring protocols for that child study team to not only know when, where, and how we are staffing those students, but also monitoring that staffing implementation and what's happening with the student beyond the staffing. How are they getting services? How are we implementing that Wilson reading intervention for students with their specially designed instruction, making sure that they're a part of that team as opposed to just being about staffing, making sure that they're a part of the intervention-based approach, the standards-based intervention-based approach that we're deploying for next year. Did I capture that right, Shelley?
Yes, the purpose of the team is to understand what kinds of things can be enhanced and what the barriers are, and so that ways to address the learning. If those things continue on, then we may.
Yeah. That's the phrase I was looking for that was escaping, was this the individual education plan of the IEP is just that. That's child study team is actually supports to make sure that there is an individual plan for that student, and that our system's approach to engaging and deploying a Wilson or a 95% group standards-based intervention program is actually being executed on in that building for that child's individual plan. It's one thing to say we're going to do it systematically across the district. It's another thing to say, how's it going to be executed for this particular student as it's written into their IEP, and making sure that that's going to happen in a daily basis with the minutes that they deserve, that's written into their plan.
So does that happen now? Does it occur now, or?
It occurs now. What's not occurring now as part of that is is utilizing the Wilson and the 95% group intervention, that center-based intervention curriculum that needs to be actually applied and associated with those IEPs, so that students that are receiving that specially designed instruction are still getting standard-based curriculum and instruction delivered to them. That part is not happening now, not universally.
Sorry, this is more of a clarifying question. Under what we are going to do and next steps, there's only one bullet and there's sub-bullets. Looks like, I don't know if that first bullet has the sentence ending. Just says programming with a specific.
I'm reading through it right now. Oh, you're, okay. You're asking me what the rest of that sentence is?
Yeah.
I can't recreate the magic right on the spot, Kelly, so I'm going to have to go back and look at my notes for that.
I think that's strategies.
Okay.
I'm just guessing.
It fits and it
It's like a
works.
Mad Lib. We could just put a word in.
It fits and it works.
Free throws, 3-point shots. We're getting,
Child study team and our yellow ladies will be specifically tracking data for black males.
specifically tracking data.
That's what it was, yeah.
Okay. So that was going to be my question. How are we going to accelerate the removal of barriers for our black males specifically? So,
It's tracking that progress monitoring data every time they use it.
okay. Can you just re-say that for the public?
Yeah, so that child study team and our ELL teachers are tracking black male data specifically,
During progress monitoring.
yeah, during the progress monitoring.
Have we found out the general number of students that we're talking about?
Josie, do you have that overall number that we're talking about, our fourth grade black males,
Fourth grade black males is 225.
225 students?
Since the question was asked earlier, 2A, the end count is about 165, and 2B, the end count is about 95.
Okay, so for fourth grade black males, I'll repeat that for everybody, again, is 225 students. Interim goal 2A for black males who identify as multilingual learners on an ELL program is 165. And first through third grade black males, students who, with an IEP, are 95.
And you said that data is or will be monitored every time they meet? Or
Through
with
their progress
what
monitoring.
frequency?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Can you share a little bit about implementation of results-focused performance review and accountability? And I remember several meetings ago, Terry bringing up like what had happened at other districts when there's too much pressure on hitting numbers. And how are you gonna increase results, but make sure that we're doing it?
Well, the first thing
Properly?
Sure. And I think it's through very transparent and empathetic conversations around, it's great to do the right things, right? The research-based strategies do the right things, but we also have to measure outputs and outcomes. And so our leaders are in a place where they know what the goals are, they know what the interim goals are, interim guardrails, and they are working towards that. The next iteration of that conversation is to put that into a performance review and evaluation system so that we know that, similarly what we did at the board table, that our budget and our time and energy is going into making sure that we have to have those goals met. And so the art of leadership is around how do you coach that and support that through a culture of safety, of learning, even as a leader, right? I think I'm going to do this with my building, and having that safe space to say, that didn't work, I'm going to try that differently next time. And so developing that culture of care while having a relentless sort of focus on achieving outcomes based in student outcomes, we've got to move in that direction. I think our leaders are actually asking for that. And they're asking for that level of clarity and that level of focus from us as an organization. That's not something that I'm hearing pushback on. I think what they want to know also is how are district leaders accountable to that too? And so that's where we started off with the executive cabinet team is experiencing that with quantifiable metrics and their performance review and evaluation. And that cascade is being rolled out.
Any other questions? All right, may I have a motion and a second to approve item D2?
Sawyer, so move.
Knox, second.
Is there any additional discussion or questions?
I was just going to ask, I know as part of student outcomes focused governance that I believe we're supposed to publicly state if we're on track or not on track. So if we could move forward, do that, so it's publicly stated, I would appreciate that.
Certainly. Matt, for Goal 2, what is your evaluation?
We are not on track.
Thank you. Any other additional questions? Okay, board members, please cast your votes. Vote is approved, 5-0. We will now move to the consent agenda. As a reminder to the board and public, the board will not engage in discussion or deliberation with a speaker regarding comments made to the agenda items. Discussion and deliberation will remain among board members at the board table, with speakers' comments informing the board's discussion, deliberation, and determinations as deemed necessary. Ms. Rios, do we have any speakers?
No speakers.
Okay. Ms. Sawyer, I believe you have the consent agenda or motion.
Yes. I move that the board approve the consent items in accordance with the recommended action for each item on the consent agenda, including bills previously authorized, certified, and approved for payment by the board secretary in the amount of $12,240,733.33, and procurement transactions in the amount of $932,610.99.
May I have a
Norris,
second?
motion to approve. Norris, second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion, or does anyone have any questions? Board members, please cast your votes. The motion, or the consent items are approved, 5-0. Next on the agenda, we have one public hearing. Item F1, public hearing for B9015 Central Campus Culinary and Welding renovations. The public hearing will come to order. Is there anyone wishing to speak to item F1? Hearing no one, I will close the public hearing. Interim Superintendent Smith, would you please introduce the matter?
I recommend the board review the proposed plans and specifications prepared by RDG Planning and Designs for culinary and welding renovations at Central Campus, hold a public hearing, and approve the plans.
May I have a motion and a second to approve item F1?
Norris, motion to approve.
I have a motion by Ms. Norris and a second by Ms. Sawyer. Is there any discussion, or does anyone have any questions? Hearing none, board members, please cast your votes. The vote is approved, 5-0. Next on the agenda, we have items of privilege. Board members, do you have anything to share?
I just want to shout out the finance team. As I was looking at the financials, they were pretty spot on in terms of budget to actuals, and that's not easy. So thank you to all of them. I'm not sure if.
It's basically just me, Jackie. I don't, yeah.
Anyways, I mean, it was really close, and so that's.
They did a great job.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
So
they did an
thank you
amazing
very
job.
much.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you to Matt. This is his last official board meeting as interim superintendent Smith. We will formally, what's it called? Grill? No, not grill. Roast. We will formally roast him in our July meeting, but it's truly been an honor to sit next to you at this table over the course of the last year. So thank you for all you've done on behalf of students here at Des Moines Public Schools. And please join us at the next meeting for the formal roast. I will turn it over to you for the superintendent's report.
Yeah, this is my last official meeting, so I just want to thank each of you. It has been a blast. I have learned a ton. I mean that sincerely. I have had lots of joyful moments, and you guys have just been amazing. Your mentorship, your guidance, and your support, and your challenging has been, I've learned so much. I'm looking forward to taking a little bit of a break and reflecting on all of that. And I just, words can't express how grateful I am for each of you and the leadership that you provide this district and this organization and what you've done for me personally and professionally. So thank you for everything. And I am super excited to welcome Dr. Roberts here July 1st. He's going to be amazing. And I am looking forward, again, to just working under him and serving under him and learning everything that I can. So I want to thank the team. You guys have been amazing. You put up with me for quite a bit. And so you're going to continue to do so, just in a different capacity. So thanks for all of that. And we've got a great staff, good students, and amazing families. So I'm proud to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. We will transition into, upon adjourning this meeting, transition into a closed session, which is not open to the public. So we kindly ask attendees to clear the room after the closed session. We will reopen the meeting for our public to resume again for our work session on the superintendent evaluation as well as the transition committee's recommendations. So thank you for joining us this evening. We greatly appreciate you all. This meeting is adjourned at 6:51 p.m.